"Sir, I'm sorry, but you'll have to give up this seat." Daniel Okafor looked up. The soft golden cabin light washed over his composed face, but his eyes darkened. In front of him stood a tall, slender flight attendant, her strained smile stretched like a tightened string, her hand extended, waiting. Around him, curious stares, a few discreet frowns, and hushed whispers all converged on him. In Daniel's hand was the business-class ticket for seat 2A, a seat he had booked weeks in advance and paid for in full, not a cent short. But the man standing just behind the attendant, somewhere in his 30s, with slicked-back hair and a tailored suit, smiled as if the seat had always belonged to him. It was a smile Daniel knew well, the smile of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. A heat rose in Daniel's chest, sharp and searing. It wasn't the first time. Since leaving Lagos for London at 16, he had grown used to that look, the unspoken question, "Are you sure you belong here?" In boardrooms, at gala dinners, even at airport check-in counters. How many times had he chosen silence? How many times had he told himself to choose battles wisely? But today, facing that smug grin and the flight attendant's too smooth tone, he knew. Today would be different. Just hours earlier, Heathrow Airport had gleamed like a palace of steel and glass. The winter light spilled cold and harsh across the vast terminal, where hurried travelers dragged suitcases like tethered animals. Daniel moved through the sea of bodies in a simple navy suit, understated yet stitched with quiet authority. At 39, tall and broad-shouldered, his polished black shoes caught the light. In his hand, a slim leather briefcase and his business-class ticket for seat 2A. This flight mattered. New York was waiting for a merger meeting that could lift his company beyond Europe. For many CEOs, it was strategy and numbers. For Daniel, it was also a first battle, to claim the right to be seen as an equal, to sit in a seat that was never meant for men like him. At the check-in counter, he had already felt it, that familiar hesitation. The polite but uncertain smile of the staff, the flicker of surprise in their eyes that seemed to ask, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Daniel had only answered with a calm nod. He wasn't going to waste energy on small fights. But deep down, memories surged. Classmates mocking his accent, teachers astonished when he aced math, the regular customer who once handed him an empty glass and said, "Pour me a drink." The business-class cabin unfolded, luxurious in every detail. Soft leather seats, golden lights smooth as honey, polished trays for fine wine. Daniel stowed his briefcase, settled into seat 2A by the window. As always, the feeling of sitting there was an affirmation. He had climbed, he had fought, and he had earned this place with his own hands. He sipped sparkling water, eyes scanning documents on his tablet. Peace. Until the shadow fell. The flight attendant stood before him, her tight smile not reaching her eyes. Her voice rang out. "I'm sorry. There has been a seating error. A special passenger needs this seat. We've arranged another place for you further back." Daniel blinked. Each word landed like acid drops. He glanced at the ticket on his lap. 2A. Clear. No mistake. Yet behind her, the young man smirked, his eyes brushing over Daniel as if he were nothing more than an obstacle in his way to his rightful seat. In that instant, Daniel's mind raced through a lifetime. His father's voice echoed, "In a foreign land, son, choose your battles wisely." His mother's memory flashed, small but proud in a brightly colored dress, speaking Yoruba in a room of strangers and making them listen. And then Nathan Cole, mentor and friend, laughing in a cafe. "Don't fade away, Daniel. Don't blend in. Become someone they cannot ignore." Daniel drew a long breath. He placed the ticket down on the tray, his hand tightening on the armrest, his voice low and steady as steel. "No, I will not move." The cabin fell silent. Whispers rose behind him. Someone discreetly raised a phone, lens tilting toward him. The young man's smirk faltered. Daniel sat taller, his back pressing against the cool leather. He no longer thought about the New York deal or the speeches ahead. He thought only of one thing. Today, he would not give up this seat. Not to anyone. Not ever again. In the glowing cabin, a black CEO in a navy suit had made his stand, not by leaving, but by declaring through silent defiance, "I belong here." The whispers in the cabin had not yet faded when Daniel's eyes quietly drifted away from the tense face of the flight attendant to the window. The cold white streaks of Heathrow's runway lights stretched across the night, reminding him of every road he had traveled to sit in this very seat. He was 16 when he first stepped off the plane at Gatwick, in the heart of an English winter. The cold pierced through his thin jacket like needles, leaving his skin numb. In those first days, every step down the high school corridor felt like trespassing in foreign territory. The smirks when he mispronounced a word, the mocking imitations of his Yoruba accent, his surname Okafor stretched into a warped sound that made him wince. He grew so weary that he began introducing himself simply as Dan. Short, easy to say, less likely to make anyone laugh. In math class, when he solved equations no one else could, his teacher's fleeting surprise looked less like admiration and more like suspicion. How could a black boy possibly excel? Daniel learned to stay silent, to walk faster so he wouldn't fall behind, to hide the bright shirts of his homeland under muted grey blazers. He called it survival. But every night, lying in his dorm bed, he knew it was only invisibility. Then came Nathan Cole, the first black man Daniel had ever seen in a tailored suit, standing tall and commanding in a boardroom full of white faces. Nathan laughed, a booming sound that shattered the suffocating air. Afterward, he invited Daniel for coffee. "Don't think your goal is to blend in," Nathan said, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Blending in is just disappearing. You must become undeniable." Those words pierced deep. Years later, when Nathan died suddenly of a heart attack at 49, Daniel sat alone in a dark room, telling himself, "If I cannot continue the road." He began, "What meaning does my existence have?" And now, here in this glowing cabin, with the steady hum of engines beneath his feet, Daniel felt all those lessons converging on this very moment. The flight attendant was still there, her strained smile thinning by the second. Behind her, the young man folded his arms, his stare hammering the message, "You will move." A few passengers whispered to each other. A silver-haired woman in the row ahead tilted her tablet just enough to catch the reflection in its glossy screen. A young man a few rows back lifted his phone, pretending to text, but the camera was aimed directly at seat 2A. Daniel could hear his heartbeat, not racing, but slowing. Calm. Controlled. He remembered the countless times he had been pushed aside. At a charity gala, when a drunken guest handed him an empty glass and asked him to pour. At an important meeting, when a newcomer mistook him for the technician setting up the projector. So many times he had smiled, nodded, swallowed his anger, only to later stand at the podium and silence the room. But this time, he would not let the truth unfold afterward. He wanted it to erupt here and now. "Sir, I can help move your bag to the back." The flight attendant tilted her head, her voice still gentle, but her lips beginning to tremble. Daniel turned, locking eyes with her, his voice deep and firm as stone. "No, I will not give up my seat." The words struck the cabin like a hammer. Whispers swelled instantly, spilling over like a dam breaking. The young man's smirk twisted into a sour sneer. In Daniel's eyes there was no trace of endurance. There was the light of decision. He no longer thought of seat 2A as a chair. It was a vow to himself. No one, no matter who, would decide his place. Somewhere in the cabin, a child whispered to her mother, "Mom, what's happening?" The mother hushed her gently. "That man refuses to give up his seat." Another passenger murmured, "I understand him. If I paid for my seat, I wouldn't leave either." Thoughts and perspectives clashed in the confined air. But at the center, Daniel sat immovable. Outwardly calm, inwardly preparing for a battle larger than himself. He adjusted the collar of his navy suit, a small motion, yet it rattled the confidence of the young man behind him. For in that instant, he realized the man in seat 2A was anything but ordinary. The air grew dense, heavy with an impending storm, and Daniel knew this storm would not pass quietly through his life. It would leave its mark for the world to see that this seat, and any seat, could never be taken from him simply because of who sat in it. The cabin seemed frozen in time. Every eye was fixed on seat 2A, each gaze carrying its own assumption, its own silent judgment. Daniel remained seated, his back straight, his eyes fixed on the space ahead, though inside his mind raged like a hidden river. He remembered a drizzling day in London when he was 20, in his second year studying engineering. A late programming class had kept him in the library until night, his eyes dark from sleeplessness. As he walked out, a group of students blocked his way, their mocking laughter cutting through the damp air. "Hey, what are you doing here? This isn't a place for people like you." The words were not blunt, but sharp enough to tear at his pride. He had said nothing, just lowered his head and walked past, his heart heavy as stone. That night, he sat by the window for hours, watching the misting rain, asking himself, "Do I really not belong here?" Memories bled into more memories. At 24, during his first interview at a major tech firm, he entered with a flawless resume, yet the panel's eyes lingered longer on his skin than his credentials. The woman at the center of the table pursed her lips before asking, "Do you think clients would feel comfortable with you representing us?" A question like a velvet-covered blade. He walked out in silence, but in that silence a new resolve formed. One day, they will be the ones coming to me. The rumble of the airplane engine pulled Daniel back to the present. The flight attendant still stood there, her forced smile thinning, her hands beginning to tremble. Behind her, The young man narrowed his eyes, his voice sharp and commanding. "What are you waiting for? Remove him!" In that moment, Daniel heard his mother's voice. Her image rose vividly, small in stature, draped in a brightly colored scarf, walking into a corporate party when his career had just begun. She had spoken in Yoruba to a waiter, making every guest turn their head. She had not cared, had not bowed. Then she had looked at him, her eyes glowing like lanterns. "You do not need permission to exist. You must assert yourself." Those words rang now like a bell. Daniel placed both hands on the armrests and lifted his head to face the flight attendant. His voice was deep and steady, not loud, but firm enough to shake the air. "This is the seat I paid for. I will not leave." The sound carried across the cabin. A man behind him cleared his throat, covering what sounded like an encouraging chuckle. The silver-haired woman in the row ahead leaned all the way over, watching more closely, and the phone that had been discreet until now tilted its lens directly at Daniel, its recording light glowing. Everything was being captured. The young man behind him scowled, his tone cutting. "Ridiculous. Who do you think you are?" Daniel turned, his dark eyes fathomless as they locked onto him, his words clear and deliberate. "I am the man who paid for this seat, and I belong here." The silence that followed was so heavy, it seemed even the engines outside pounded like drums. Daniel felt his breath slow. He no longer trembled like he had in his youth, no longer avoided the stares of others. Inside him burned a fire, but one contained within calm control. He thought of Nathan, his late mentor, and the reminder he had given. Surviving is not enough. You must be undeniable. And now, in the glow of the business class cabin, before dozens of eyes and a camera streaming live, Daniel chose to be undeniable. The young man hissed, clinging to his bravado. "You'll regret this. This seat is for people who matter." Daniel's lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. "Perhaps you will soon learn just how much I matter." The flight attendant flinched. Some passengers exchanged glances. The air shifted, as if the whole cabin were waiting for a sudden turn of fate. In the golden light of the cabin, Daniel Okafor was not only holding on to a seat. He was holding on to years of being underestimated, to the voices of the past, to the dignity of all those who had been pushed aside. And he knew this battle was only the beginning. The air in the business class cabin tightened like a violin string pulled to its limit. Every glance, every breath was fixed on seat 2A, where Daniel Okafor sat unmoving, his eyes sharp and unyielding. The flight attendant still held her forced smile, but the corners of her lips trembled. She drew a breath, struggling to regain professionalism. "Sir, if you do not cooperate, we will have to move you to a seat in the back. This is an official request." Her voice was clear, deliberately loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Some passengers straightened in their seats, half curious, half annoyed. A middle-aged businessman shook his head and muttered, "It's just a seat." But almost immediately, the silver-haired woman across the aisle shook her head gently and whispered back, "No, this is not just a seat." Daniel looked up. The cabin lights reflected off his face, highlighting the depth in his eyes. He did not raise his voice or harden his tone. He spoke slowly, each word landing heavy as stone. I booked this seat. I paid for this seat. This seat is mine. I will not leave. The words cracked the first fracture in the wall of false authority. The smile on the attendant's lips faltered, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. The young man behind could not hold back, stepping forward with irritation in his voice. Do you know who I am? I fly this route every month. I'm a regular. Daniel turned his head and cut him off with a look sharp as a blade. You are the one who came after. And that is the only truth here. The cabin fell silent. That clean, precise reply wiped the arrogant smile from the young man's face in an instant. The flight attendant glanced around in panic and signaled for help. An older man, apparently the lead attendant, stepped forward. He bowed slightly, his tone polite but weighted with pressure. Sir, please do not make this difficult. We have prepared another seat just as comfortable. If you refuse, we will have no choice but to notify the captain. Daniel breathed slowly, his eyes steady. He leaned slightly, pulling his phone from the pocket of his suit. It was a small gesture, but it sent a jolt through the cabin. Several passengers immediately lifted their phones higher, recording the scene. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, his deep voice low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. Activate the plan. Cancel all partnership contracts with this airline. Immediately. In that moment, the young man's eyes widened, and the two attendants froze as if struck. Daniel did not shout, did not explain. One short sentence, but it landed like thunder splitting the sky. A single question echoed in everyone's mind. Who is he? A younger passenger whispered, My God, he must be a major partner of the airline. The silver-haired woman gave a thin smile and murmured, I would guess even more than that. The young man, who moments earlier radiated absolute confidence, suddenly stepped back, sweat beading at his temple. He stammered, That's impossible, you're bluffing. Daniel turned his gaze, calm but piercing like a dagger. You may believe me, or you can wait and see. For a few seconds, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The silence was so thick that the steady hum of the engines outside sounded like drums, and in that silence, the bare truth revealed itself. The black man they had dismissed was holding power none of them had imagined. The flight attendant leaned down, whispering, Who are you, really? Daniel leaned back slightly, his voice even, almost serene. The man you should never have underestimated. The front cabin door opened. The captain, in his crisp uniform and carrying an air of authority, appeared. Instantly, the tension in the cabin tightened further. He stopped in front of seat 2A, his gaze sweeping the scene. A black passenger sitting firm, two shaken attendants, and a white man fuming behind him. What's going on here? His voice was deep and clear, like a bell tolling. Everyone waited, and Daniel knew. This moment would be the turning point. In the soft, golden light of the cabin, as the captain stepped closer, every seat and every eye became part of the stage. On one side, hidden arrogance. On the other, power yet to be revealed. And within a few breaths, the mask of false authority would be ripped away, exposing a truth that would shake the entire cabin. The captain stood tall, his uniform crisp, the golden insignia gleaming on his shoulders. His eyes swept across the scene, a white passenger standing behind with restless impatience. two tense flight attendants, and Daniel Okafor, sitting calmly in seat 2A. "What seems to be the issue here?" His voice carried the weight of command, firm but steady. The flight attendant quickly stepped forward, clutching her small notebook tightly. "Captain, this passenger. There has been a mix-up with the seating. Seat 2A is reserved for a regular VIP. We have arranged another seat for him further back." Daniel lifted the ticket from the small tray table, his deep voice cutting through her words. "There is no mix-up. This is my ticket. Seat 2A, booked weeks in advance." He held it up, the printed 2A clear for the entire cabin to see. The young man behind him jumped in immediately, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I fly this route every month. This seat is always mine. I don't understand how someone like him could be sitting here." The cabin stirred with shock. That one careless outburst stripped away the pretense, revealing the truth. It was not about the ticket. It was about who was deemed worthy of the seat. The captain's eyes darkened. He turned, staring directly at the young man, then back to Daniel. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the steady roar of engines outside. "Your name, sir?" the captain asked, eyes fixed on Daniel. "Daniel Okafor," he replied slowly. Another pause, heavier this time. A flicker of recognition passed through the captain's eyes. Perhaps he had seen this face on the cover of a business magazine. Perhaps he had read about him in the financial press. Daniel was not just another passenger, and the captain bowed his head slightly, as though in acknowledgement. The young man behind, losing patience, snapped. "Captain, what's there to discuss? Tell him to move. This is trivial, it's wasting my time." This time the captain turned fully, his voice firm as steel. "No. Mr. Okafor has every right to sit in the seat he booked. If you do not accept that, you may return to your assigned seat, or you may leave this flight." Whispers rippled through the cabin. Some passengers stifled laughter, while the silver-haired woman offered a discreet smile, as if she had been waiting for this very response. The young man stood frozen, his face burning red. He opened his mouth to speak, but the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down silenced him. Daniel remained seated, his gaze calm. Yet inside, a different feeling stirred. Not pride, but the quiet steadiness of someone watching the scales tip toward justice. The younger flight attendant, the one who had made the first demand, dropped her head. Her hands clutched her notebook so tightly they shook. She realized in that instant this was not a small incident, but a lesson that would follow her for the rest of her career. The older lead attendant cleared his throat, trying to salvage something. "Captain, if this disrupts the overall passenger experience..." The captain cut him off, his voice cold as ice. "No experience is ever built on injustice. Mr. Okafor is in his rightful seat. This matter is closed." The young man hissed through clenched teeth. "You'll regret this. You think one seat makes you better than me?" Daniel turned his head slightly, his thin smile sharp as a razor's edge. "I have never believed a chair defines a man, but today it shows clearly who has truly lost their place." A few gasps rose from the back rows. Someone even clapped briefly before falling silent, afraid to disturb the weight of the moment. The young man gripped his suitcase handle, then turned abruptly, his face crimson, retreating in humiliation to his assigned seat. The captain gave Daniel a slight nod before stepping away. "Have a pleasant flight, Mr. Okafor." The cabin's atmosphere shifted. The tension dissolved into hushed chatter, like the sky clearing after a storm. Passengers whispered, phones discreetly recording. Another short clip destined for social media was already being made. Daniel exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge that this was far from over. His phone screen still displayed the message. "Contract cancelled. The board has been notified." He leaned back, eyes fixed on the dark sky outside, while inside him a flame burned bright. In seat 2A, Daniel Okafor had reclaimed more than his place. He had drawn a line, sharp and undeniable, and he knew that when the wheels touched down in New York, the consequences would ripple far beyond this cabin, reaching all the way into the crowded boardrooms of the airline's headquarters. The captain's footsteps faded down the aisle, leaving the business-class cabin heavy with tension, but also alive with fire. Every eye remained fixed on seat 2A. A few whispered, and phones tilted toward Daniel as if to capture every moment. The silver-haired woman in the row ahead leaned back slightly, her eyes gleaming. "Hold your ground, my friend," she whispered, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. He gave the faintest nod, a thin smile flickering across his lips, but in his eyes, the calm had hardened into something else. A sharp, unshakable resolve. Daniel unlocked his phone. On the screen, a message from his assistant glowed. "Contract cancelled. The board has received directives. Statement in preparation." His finger moved slowly across the screen, the weight of it like gripping the handle of a sharp blade. Each character, each line of text carried the weight of a decision that could never be undone. He remembered 6 months earlier, when he had quietly commissioned an independent audit. The numbers in that report were etched into his memory. Complaints buried, passengers of color singled out, incidents swept under the rug with extra mileage, points offered to buy silence. He had kept quiet all this time, waiting for the moment it would matter most. And tonight, that moment had arrived. Across the aisle, a young man whispered to his companion. "That's him. I'm sure I saw him in Forbes. He's the CEO of an investment firm." His friend leaned closer, voice low but trembling. "Not just that. His company is negotiating a multi-million-dollar partnership with this very airline." The rumor spread like fire through dry grass. Curious glances shifted, their tone changing from silent disdain to awe, laced with unease. Daniel sat still, drawing in a long, steady breath. His heartbeat drummed in rhythm, slow and deliberate, like war drums before battle. In his mind, he was no longer in the cabin. He was already in tomorrow's boardroom in Manhattan, picturing the tense faces, the stiffened necks, as headlines erupted across the media. "Major airline faces discrimination crisis in business class." He could almost hear the empty excuses forming. "It was a misunderstanding. We apologize. We promise reform." But he knew no one would believe them now. Not when the world had the video. Not when he himself was in it. The young man, the one who had tried to claim seat 2A, clutched the armrest, his face pale. He had lived in a world where doors opened at the raise of an eyebrow. But now, under the glare of recording phones and before the man he had dismissed, he felt himself shrink. Daniel did not need to turn around to sense the trembling. The silence that enveloped him was no longer arrogance, but the crushing weight of shame. Another flight attendant approached, a tray of water trembling slightly in her hands. Her voice was soft, careful. "Mr. Okafor, would you like something to drink?" Daniel looked into her eyes. No more forced smiles. No more pretense. Only fatigue and a trace of respect. He shook his head. "Thank you. I'm fine." She bowed slightly and stepped back. The glow of his phone lit Daniel's face. He opened a private folder, a vault of documents, customer complaints, leaked internal emails, photos proving the quiet persistence of systemic bias within the airline. What had once been mere numbers were now ammunition. He typed a short message into an email. "Activate emergency protocol. Prepare to announce dismissal of all staff involved, both ground and cabin. Press release within 12 hours. The blinking cursor pulsed like a heartbeat. Daniel drew in a breath and pressed send. The cabin hummed with whispers, but within Daniel was absolute stillness. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of a man who had just placed the final piece on the board. The silver-haired woman turned to her husband, her voice firm despite its softness. "You see, this is not just a passenger. This is a shift they never saw coming." Her husband nodded, his eyes reflecting quiet respect. Daniel leaned back into seat 2A, his gaze fixed on the night sky outside the window. The engines roared steady, like drums of war, heralding the start of a greater battle. And he knew, from this moment on, it wasn't only the seating arrangement in this cabin that had changed. It was the very fate of an airline now thrown off course. The night outside the window had only just swallowed the last streaks of London's lights, but inside the cabin, another storm was forming. Not of wind, but of information. The phones that had first been raised discreetly were now unblinking eyes that could no longer be hidden. A young passenger in the row behind whispered, "If this video hits TikTok, it's going to blow up." His friend adjusted his camera angle, replying softly, "Not just TikTok. This will be global news." Daniel Okafor felt every gaze on him. Some carried sympathy, others resentment, many simply curiosity. But all of them converged on him, the black man seated firmly in 2A, as though he were the center of a universe that had just tilted off its axis. He sat still, breathing slow, letting the hum of the engines become the drumbeat for a battle no longer confined to the cabin, but ready to erupt across the world. In his pocket, his phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages flashed from his assistant. "Clips are surfacing on social media. Hashtag seat 2A is climbing fast." Press requests are coming in. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. "We're trending worldwide in under 30 minutes. Daniel closed his eyes. Memories crashed over him like waves. The years he chose silence just to survive. The polite nods when mistaken for a waiter. The forced smiles to avoid confrontation. All of it had once helped him move forward, but it had carved away pieces of himself. And now, in the soft golden glow of the cabin, he saw it clearly. That silence had been the chain. And tonight, the chain had been broken. The young man who had demanded the seat now sat in silence. His phone shook in his hands as he typed frantically, perhaps texting someone outside, but the trembling betrayed him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the panic of a spoiled animal cornered for the first time. The young flight attendant who had asked Daniel to move stood near the rear of the cabin, pale, her lips pressed tight. She knew the video had captured it all. And in that video, she was the one who had built the wall of prejudice, a wall Daniel had just smashed. A middle-aged man in a grey suit leaned toward his companion, voice lowered. Who is he? He can't just be an ordinary passenger. His friend's eyes stayed locked on Daniel, his voice unsteady. That's Daniel Okafor, CEO of Orion Capital. His firm is about to put billions into this very airline. The words spread like sparks on dry tinder. Within minutes, curiosity gave way to recognition. The glances that once carried disdain shifted into wary respect, even reverence. Daniel opened his eyes, his gaze cutting forward. In his mind, he could already see tomorrow. The headlines exploding, the board of directors in emergency calls, apologies scribbled in the dead of night. But this time, he would not accept an apology. This time, he would demand change. His phone buzzed again. A new message. Journalists asking if you'll make a statement after landing. The video just hit 1 million views in 20 minutes. Daniel closed the phone, exhaling slowly, his eyes fixed ahead. He knew this had gone far beyond a seat. It was now a symbol. The silver-haired woman, who had been quiet until now, turned fully to face him. Her voice was gentle, but it rang like testimony. Thank you. Not just for you. For all of us. Daniel nodded, his eyes alight with steady fire. He answered softly, almost only for her. Yes. For all of us. In that moment, Daniel realized he was no longer fighting alone. Every phone raised, every hashtag igniting, every whispered thank you, they were turning his stand into a movement. Outside, the engines roared as the plane cut into the darkness. But inside, a new light had been lit. Daniel Okafor sat upright, his gaze unflinching. Seat 2A was no longer just a seat. It was a banner. And from this moment on, the world would have to look at him, and never turn away again. The night sky slowly faded as the horizon of New York emerged. Dark purple clouds shifted into streaks of red and orange, like bruises stretching across the heavens. The plane began its descent, and the captain's voice echoed through the speakers. "We are preparing to land. Please fasten your seatbelts." The cabin tilted gently, but inside many passengers, the turbulence was far greater. They could not forget what had happened at seat 2A, and now they knew that once the wheels touched the runway, the consequences would ripple outward like a tidal wave. Daniel Okafor sat upright, eyes fixed on the window. The runway lights flickered in rapid lines, racing past like the heartbeat of a world counting down. In his hand, his phone vibrated again. A message from his assistant lit the screen. "Media are already gathering at JFK. The airline's board has called an emergency meeting. #seat2A has reached 12 million views." Daniel drew in a long breath. He had stood on global stages, signed billion-dollar deals, but never had the weight felt so heavy. Because this time, he was not only standing for himself, but for countless others who had once been forced out of their own seats. The wheels struck the ground and the cabin shuddered. A few passengers clapped instinctively, but the applause died quickly, as everyone knew the real story was only about to begin. The seatbelt light went out. The metallic clicks of unbuckling rang across the cabin. The young man who had tried to claim 2A kept his head bowed, his face pale. He avoided every glance, each step he took heavier than the last, exposing his defeat. The other passengers gave him a wide berth, as though an invisible wall had opened around him. Daniel rose, adjusting the lapel of his navy suit. The passengers nearby fell silent, parting to give him space. Respect filled the air without a word being spoken. When the cabin door opened, 3 uniformed airline officials stood waiting. Not security, but senior management. Their expressions were tight. One of them stepped forward, voice raspy with unease. "Mr. Okafor, we've been informed. We will take care of this immediately." Daniel's gaze met theirs, not with anger, but with a coldness that made them lower their heads. His voice was steady, low, but carried weight like a verdict. "Make sure you do it right." The man nodded quickly, almost frantically. "Yes, immediately." Passengers behind them watched, wide-eyed. In that moment, they understood the truth. The man they had doubted was the very one who held the power to decide the fate of the airline itself. Beyond the glass of JFK's terminal, camera flashes erupted. Reporters crowded forward, microphones thrust high, voices firing questions all at once. "Sturm? Okafor, were you discriminated against? Are you ending your partnership with the airline? What message do you have for passengers who have gone through the same experience?" Daniel paused mid-step. He could have spoken, could have condemned them on the spot. Instead, he chose silence, letting his eyes answer. Eyes that were unflinching, unyielding. Then he walked on, each step echoing like a drumbeat across the polished floor. Inside the waiting SUV, Daniel leaned back, though his eyes still held a trace of fire. His phone rang. His assistant's voice came through. "Sir, every major news outlet has reached out. The airline's board has issued a formal apology." "But," Daniel cut him off, his voice sharp, "an apology is not enough. Prepare the demands for reform. I want the Minority Passenger Support Fund announced, and every staff member involved today must be removed from their positions." There was silence on the other end, then a firm reply. "Understood." Daniel closed his eyes. He did not feel triumph. He felt responsibility. Because in this moment, millions of people were looking to him, expecting something greater than protest, expecting transformation. Meanwhile, social media erupted. The video from the cabin was shared tens of millions of times. One comment rose above the flood. "He didn't just hold the seat for himself. He held it for all of us." The words spread like fire, turning Daniel from a steadfast passenger into a symbol. As the SUV pulled away from JFK, the skyline of New York gleamed ahead. Daniel Okafor knew that tonight he was no longer just the man defending a seat. He had become the voice of all those who had ever been pushed aside. And from this moment forward, an entire industry would be forced to change. The next morning, the airline's boardroom in Manhattan was blazing with light, but carried no warmth. The glass walls reflected the tense faces of more than a dozen board members. The air was so heavy, it felt as though someone had sealed every window to keep the storm outside from rushing in. But the storm didn't need to come in. It was already in the room. Daniel Okafor entered, tall and commanding in a dark grey suit, each step of his polished shoes striking the marble floor with sharp finality. Every eye turned toward him. Some looked away, some forced composure, while a few stared with a mix of fear and resentment. The chairman, silver hair neatly combed, forced a smile as he began. Ms. Rockefeller, first of all, we extend our deepest apologies. Yesterday's incident was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Daniel cut him off. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried through the entire room like a hammer strike. Do not call it a misunderstanding. You know very well it was not. And silence fell like a pane of heavy glass. Eyes flickered. Hands trembled slightly as pens were set down on the table. Daniel set his briefcase down, pulled out a thin file, and opened it. Each page turned with a sharp snap, like the crack of a whip. This is the independent report I commissioned 6 months ago. Passenger complaints of discrimination. Internal emails mocking customers of color. HR records showing promotions blocked for minority employees. He paused, his gaze cutting across every face. Yesterday, you thought you were forcing a passenger out of his seat, but in truth, you exposed your entire system. A younger director stammered, but we can resolve this with a settlement, a public apology. Daniel leaned forward, his voice slow but razor-sharp. Apologies are cheap. I am not here to buy an apology. The words froze the room. A woman at the far end bit her lip. The chairman removed his glasses, wiping his forehead. Daniel straightened, placing a firm hand on the file. His voice rang out like a verdict. I want 3 things. First, every employee involved in yesterday's incident must be terminated immediately. Second, the airline must establish a public fund to support minority passengers and minority-owned businesses. Third, every senior executive, including all of you, must undergo mandatory anti-bias training with results made transparent. He stopped, eyes gleaming like steel in the morning light. This is not a negotiation. This is the condition for your survival. A murmur broke out. An older director leaned forward, his voice sharp with defiance. You cannot order us around. You are just a business partner. Daniel cut him short with a thin, unreadable smile. He held up his phone, the screen showing the stock price plummeting. News of the incident had already wiped hundreds of millions off the company's value overnight. You call me a partner. His voice lowered, each word striking like a hammer. No. I am the one who decides whether you will have any partners left at all. The air grew so heavy that even the ticking of the clock could be heard. Some board members shifted uneasily in their seats, sweat beading at their temples. The storm had broken out in the cabin the night before, but the true aftershock was tearing through this room now. After several seconds of silence, the chairman exhaled heavily. Very well. We will accept your conditions. The murmurs died instantly, replaced by the silence of surrender. Daniel gave a small nod, gathering his file. His final words struck like the closing of a judge's gavel. You will make the announcement within 24 hours. If you don't, I will. He turned and walked away, leaving behind a room stunned into stillness, as though they had just witnessed a sentence being delivered. Outside the building, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing like lightning. Daniel did not stop, but inside, he knew one truth. Today, it was not only one airline that had been forced to change. An entire system, an entire way of thinking, was now shaken to its core. And this was only the beginning. The news erupted like fire meeting wind. That morning, every major television network ran the same headline. Black CEO asked to give up his business class seat. His defiance shakes the entire airline industry. The video from inside the cabin spread at a staggering pace. Every second, thousands of comments appeared, some furious, some supportive, some in tears, because they felt the story was their own. The hashtag #seat2a climbed to the very top of global trends. In his New York office, Daniel Okafor stood before the wide glass window, looking out at the glowing city. His phone rang endlessly. CNN, BBC, even newspapers that had long ignored the issue of racial discrimination were all demanding an interview. His assistant entered, voice urgent. "You are not just the center of the media storm, sir. You are becoming a symbol. Young people everywhere are posting with the caption, 'If he can hold his seat, then I can hold mine.'" Daniel turned, his eyes free of pride. What he felt was weight, responsibility. The airline's board of directors was forced to hold a press conference that very day. Images of the silver-haired chairman bowing his head and apologizing flooded the airwaves, his voice trembling. "We were wrong. We accept all of Mr. Okafor's demands. All staff involved will be terminated. A fund for minority passengers will be established, and we commit to a complete reform." The entire world witnessed the fall of an airline giant. Yet, for many, it did not feel like collapse, but rebirth. That evening, Daniel appeared on CNN. The reporter asked, "Do you think this was just an isolated incident, or does it reflect something deeper?" Daniel looked straight into the camera, his eyes calm, but burning with fire. No one should ever be asked to give up a seat that rightfully belongs to them, whether on a plane, in a classroom, or in a boardroom. This is not only my story. This is the story of everyone who has ever been told they do not belong. In that moment, millions of people watching from their homes felt as if he was speaking for them. The chain reaction began. Other airlines rushed to review their policies. Major corporations issued statements pledging to combat bias. And on social media, the story of Seat 2A became a new symbol, the symbol of the right to belong, the right not to have to ask for permission to exist. A young black student in Paris wrote, "I will remember his words. I too have the right to sit in my class, to speak up, and not let anyone take away my voice." A young employee in Tokyo shared, "He kept his seat. I will keep my career." Daniel sat in his office, the computer screen flooded with news updates. He thought of his mother, remembered her in her bright shawl walking into crowded rooms without ever lowering her head. He thought of Nathan Cole, his late mentor, who once told him, "Do not blend in, be undeniable." Now he understood he had truly stepped into that role. Undeniable. Night fell, and the lights of New York sparkled outside. Daniel sat alone by the window, a glass of water catching the city's glow in his hand. He did not feel victory, nor did he feel pride. What he felt was the weight of a longer road unfolding ahead, a road where every step would carry the eyes and expectations of millions. He whispered, as if making a vow to himself, "This seat will never be taken again, not just for me, for everyone." Seat 2A, once just a place on an airplane, had become a global symbol. And Daniel Okafor, once underestimated, now stood tall as living proof that true power does not come from what others grant you, but from the courage to hold on to your rightful place. That day in the sky, Seat 2A was no longer just a number printed on a ticket. It had become a symbol of a truth everyone knows but few dare to say. The right to belong is not a privilege. It is a fundamental right of every human being. Daniel Okafor did not just hold a seat for himself. He held it for all those who had ever been pushed to the margins. For all those who had ever heard the cold words, "You do not belong here." This story reminds us that sometimes a single decision to stand firm is enough to turn an entire system, that one resolute no can shake the walls that once seemed unbreakable. If you believe that no one has the right to decide another person's place, like to let this story spread. Do not forget to subscribe to follow the journeys ahead, where hidden truths will be revealed. And finally, leave a comment with just 2 words, "Hold seat," to affirm that you too will never give up your rightful place.